The crystalline halls of the Galactic Council Chamber had witnessed 3 millennia of peaceful deliberation. Today, they would witness something far different. Ambassador Veltar of the Zephyrian Commonwealth adjusted his bioluminescent tendrils nervously as he watched the holographic displays showing vote tallies from across the galaxy. The numbers were staggering and terrifying in their implications. "Motion carries," announced Supreme Counselor THYSS, her ancient voice carrying across the vast chamber to the representatives of 47 different species. By a vote of 46-1, the Galactic Council hereby declares a state of active warfare against the Human Federation and all associated territories. The lone dissenting vote had come from the Altarian delegation, whose ambassador now sat in stunned silence. Even they seemed shocked by their own choice to stand with humanity. Veltar's mind raced as he processed what had just occurred. 3,000 years. 3,000 years since the last galactic war, since the founding peace of Zirion had been signed in the ashes of the Great Purge Wars. The humans hadn't even existed as a spacefaring civilization back then. They were still throwing rocks at each other on their little blue planet, while the galaxy burned around conflicts they couldn't even imagine. But that was exactly the problem, wasn't it? The human representative, Admiral Sarah Chun, stood slowly from her position in the isolation chamber that had been constructed specifically for this hearing. Her dark eyes swept across the assembled delegates with a calmness that sent chills through Veltar's exoskeleton. She was young by galactic standards, barely 60 standard years old, yet she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen the rise and fall of empires. "Counselor THYSS," Admiral Chin said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation matrix. "I formally request clarification on the specific charges that have led to this declaration." The Supreme Counselor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep contemplation among her species. "The charges, Admiral, are numerous and have been building for the past 2 centuries of human expansion. Violation of the non-interference protocols on 47 documented occasions. Unauthorized terraforming activities in 17 contested systems. Military buildup exceeding established treaties in the Outer Rim sectors. And, most significantly, the systematic undermining of galactic economic stability through what your people call competitive innovation." Admiral Chin's expression didn't change, but Veltar noticed her hands clench slightly behind her back. "Innovation is now considered a war crime. When it threatens the established order that has maintained peace for 3 millennia, yes," replied Counselor THYSS. "Your species has introduced technological advances at a rate that destabilizes entire sectors. The Kytherian Mining Guild has lost 60% of their contracts because human mining techniques are considered more efficient. The Helican Transportation Consortium has filed for sector bankruptcy because human ships are faster and cheaper to operate. Entire civilizations are restructuring their economies to compete with human standards." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Veltar found himself thinking about his own world's recent struggles. The Zephyrian Commonwealth had built their entire civilization around their mastery of biotechnology, growing their ships and cities from specially cultivated organisms. It had taken them 4,000 years to perfect their techniques, creating a society of living cities and breathing starships that were marvels of organic engineering. Then, the humans had arrived in their sector 200 years ago with something they called hybrid biomechanical integration. Within 50 years, they had not only matched Zephyrian biotech capabilities but exceeded them, creating ships that were part grown, part manufactured, and entirely more efficient than anything the Commonwealth had ever produced. The worst part wasn't the technology itself. It was how freely the humans shared it. They didn't hoard their knowledge like the ancient races did. They published their findings, offered training programs, and seemed genuinely excited when other species improved upon their designs. It was disruptive in ways that conquest never could be. "The humans," continued another delegate, War Master Corex of the Sarthian Empire, "have demonstrated a pattern of behavior that threatens the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. They refuse to accept their place in the established order. When the Outer Rim accords clearly designated human space as a Class C development zone, they ignored these boundaries and established colonies in 17 Class A systems reserved for elder races. Admiral Chen stepped forward in her chamber. Those systems were uninhabited and had been for over 800 years. We checked the databases thoroughly. Uninhabited by choice. Korex's battle-scarred hide flushed deep red with anger. The Andorian Republic claimed those systems as future expansion territory 6 centuries ago. Just because they haven't needed them yet doesn't mean humans can simply move in. With respect, War Master, Admiral Chen replied, her tone remaining diplomatically neutral. If claiming and used territory for 600 years constitutes ownership, then I'd like to claim the entire Andromeda galaxy for humanity right now. We might need it eventually. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through some of the younger delegates. But the elder races were not amused. Veltar could see the fundamental disconnect playing out before his eyes. The established galactic powers thought in terms of millennia, making plans that spanned dozens of generations. They viewed the universe as a finite resource to be carefully managed and preserved. Humans thought in decades, maybe centuries at most, and seemed to view the universe as an infinite playground full of possibilities. Counselor THYSS raised one of her primary manipulator arms for silence. The specific incidents of territorial expansion are merely symptoms of a larger problem. The human concept of progress is fundamentally incompatible with galactic stability. Your species has advanced from primitive agriculture to faster-than-light travel in less than 10,000 years. This rate of development is unprecedented and unsustainable. Unsustainable for whom? Admiral Chen asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Veltar found himself thinking about the deeper implications. The great galactic civilizations had reached a kind of equilibrium over the millennia. Each species had found their niche, their specialty, their role in the cosmic order. The Zephyrians were the bioengineers, the Sarthians were the military backbone, the Heliconites controlled transportation, the Kytherians managed resource extraction. It was a system that worked, that maintained peace and prosperity for everyone. Until the humans arrived and started doing everything. They didn't specialize. They didn't stay in their lane. They saw a problem and found a solution, regardless of whether that problem was supposed to be their responsibility. They had human doctors working alongside the galaxy's best Altarian healers, human engineers collaborating with Zephyrian bioarchitects, human soldiers training with Sarthian war masters, and then going off to develop entirely new forms of combat that made traditional military doctrine obsolete. It wasn't malicious. That was perhaps the most frustrating part. The humans weren't trying to dominate or conquer. They were just themselves. Curious, adaptable, relentlessly innovative. They treated every challenge as a puzzle to be solved rather than an accepted fact of life. The final straw, announced Counselor THYSS, was the incident at the Nexus station 3 months ago. Admiral Chen's composed facade cracked slightly. That was a rescue operation. We saved over 40,000 lives. You violated the Prime Protocol, Korex snarled. Nexus Station was experiencing a cascading system failure. Standard Galactic Emergency Protocol requires evacuation to approved safe zones, while Specialized Restoration Corps personnel handle the technical crisis. Instead, human vessels interfered directly with the station's core systems. The station was going to explode, Admiral Chun said, her voice rising slightly. Your evacuation protocols would have taken 18 hours. The core would have breached in 6. We had the technical capability to stabilize the situation, so we acted. You improvised, THYSS said coldly. You jury-rigged solutions using untested techniques and unproven technologies. You turned the station's own atmosphere processors into makeshift cooling systems and somehow convinced the central AI to reconfigure itself to manage power distribution in ways its programmers never intended. It worked, yes, but it could have failed catastrophically. Veltar remembered the reports from Nexus Station. The human solution had been elegant and terrifying in its audacity. They had essentially performed surgery on a critical piece of galactic infrastructure using tools and techniques that existed nowhere in the approved manuals. It was the kind of innovation that could have revolutionized space station design across the galaxy, or it could have killed everyone aboard. The humans had been confident it would work. They were right, but that wasn't the point. The point, THYSS continued, as if reading Veltar's thoughts, is that your species consistently acts without considering the broader implications. You see immediate problems and apply immediate solutions. You don't consider the precedent you're setting, the systems you're disrupting, or the long-term consequences of your actions. Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. So this is really about fear. You're declaring war because you're afraid of change. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages, while the translation matrix struggled to keep up. Accusations of arrogance flew through the air alongside demands for immediate human submission to galactic authority. Through it all, Admiral Chen stood calmly in her isolation chamber, watching the chaos with those dark, calculating eyes. Veltar found himself studying the human woman more carefully. She didn't look like a representative of a species that had just been declared war upon. She looked like someone who had been expecting this moment and had already begun planning for what came next. That realization sent a cold chill through his biomechanical nervous system. How long had the humans known this was coming? How long had they been preparing? Counselor THYSS eventually restored order to the chamber. Admiral Chun, you will return immediately to human space and inform your leadership that they have 72 standard hours to begin full compliance with Galactic Council authority. This includes immediate cessation of all unauthorized technological development, withdrawal from all contested territories, and submission to Council oversight of all future human activities. And if we refuse? Admiral Chen asked. The question was asked so calmly that it took a moment for its implications to sink in. She wasn't asking what the consequences would be. She was asking what the Council planned to do about human noncompliance. Then, the combined fleets of 46 galactic civilizations will enforce compliance, THYSS replied. Make no mistake, Admiral. Humanity may have advanced rapidly, but you are still a young species facing the accumulated military might of 3 millennia of galactic development. This is not a war you can win. Admiral Chun nodded slowly, as if considering the mathematical realities of the situation. Counselor THYSS, may I ask one final question before I depart? You may. In your 3,000 years of peace, how many of your member civilizations have ever fought a war against an opponent that had nothing left to lose? The question hung in the chamber like the echo of distant thunder. Veltar felt his bioluminescent tendrils dim involuntarily as the implications washed over him. The established galactic powers had fought wars of conquest, wars of territory, wars of resources. They had fought careful, calculated conflicts with clear objectives and acceptable losses. But humanity wasn't fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting for the right to exist as themselves. They were fighting for the right to innovate, to explore, to push boundaries, and solve problems in ways that no one had tried before. They were fighting for their very nature as a species. Admiral Chen activated the communication device at her station. This is Admiral Chun to Fleet Command. Message begins. The die is cast. Execute Protocol 7. Message ends. She looked up at the assembled delegates one final time. Counselor THYSS, members of the Galactic Council, you have just declared war on a species that spent most of its evolutionary history trying to kill itself, and somehow managed to reach the stars anyway. We have been preparing for this day since our first contact with galactic civilization 2.5 centuries ago. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. We studied your histories, your military doctrines, your technologies. We learned everything we could about how galactic wars are fought. And then, we prepared for a different kind of war entirely. Admiral Chen began gathering her materials with careful, deliberate movements. You see, the thing about humans is that we're very good at learning from our mistakes. And our biggest mistake was assuming that a galaxy this big would have room for everyone. She paused at the exit of her isolation chamber. You'll find that we've learned quite a lot from that mistake. 72 hours, you said? You might want to start moving your fleets now. You're going to need every minute of that head start. The transmission ended, and Admiral Chen's hologram flickered out of existence. The chamber remained in stunned silence for several long moments before the reality of what had just occurred began to set in. Veltar looked around at his fellow delegates and realized that none of them truly understood what they had just unleashed. They were thinking in terms of traditional warfare, of fleet movements, and territorial objectives. They were planning to fight the last war, not the next one. Somewhere in the depths of human space, protocols were being activated that had been developed in secret for over 2 centuries. Technologies were being deployed that existed in no galactic database. Strategies were being implemented that had been crafted specifically for this moment, when humanity would finally be forced to fight for its survival against impossible odds. The Galactic Council had just declared war on a species that had been expecting this declaration since the day they first ventured beyond their home system. They had been preparing, learning, and adapting while the rest of the galaxy assumed that their youth and inexperience would make them easy to control. As Veltar watched the other delegates begin their discussions of fleet deployments and military strategies, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were all making a terrible mistake. The humans had been studying galactic civilization for centuries, learning from every interaction, every negotiation, every cultural exchange. The question that kept echoing in his mind was simple and terrifying. What exactly had they learned? And, more importantly, what were they about to teach the rest of the galaxy in return? Captain Marcus Rodriguez had been waiting in the observation deck of the UES Prometheus when Admiral Chen's message arrived. Around him, the bridge crew maintained their stations with the calm professionalism that had become the hallmark of the human fleet, but he could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they held themselves just a little too straight. They had all known this day would come eventually. Protocol 7 confirmed, Captain, reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Zhang. All fleet commanders are acknowledging receipt and beginning implementation. Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed the positions of human vessels throughout known space. To the casual observer, it might have looked like a fairly standard defensive deployment. The reality was far more complex and far more terrifying for anyone who understood what they were really looking at. Time to fleet rendezvous, he asked. 18 hours, sir, responded his navigator, Commander Okafor. The last of the deep patrol vessels should reach their assigned positions within 24 hours. And the sleeper fleet? Lieutenant Zhang consulted her encrypted communications panel. Wake-up protocols initiated successfully. All vessels responding. Estimated activation time, 6 hours. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The sleeper fleet had been humanity's most closely guarded secret for over a century. While the Galactic Council had been tracking human military buildup and expressing concern about the growing size of the human fleet, they had completely missed the fact that humanity had been building 2 fleets simultaneously. The visible fleet, the one that participated in joint exercises and showed up at diplomatic functions, represented perhaps 40% of humanity's actual military capability. The rest had been constructed in the dark spaces between stars, in hollowed-out asteroids, and hidden shipyards that existed nowhere on any galactic navigation chart. For 137 years, humanity had been building ships and training crews in absolute secrecy, preparing for the day when the galaxy's patience with human independence would finally run out. That day had apparently arrived. Signal from Admiral Santos, Lieutenant Zhang announced. The Mars defense grid is fully operational. All planetary shields are at maximum capacity. Marcus felt another piece of tension leave his shoulders. The planetary defense systems were another innovation that had given the Galactic Council pause. Most civilizations protected their worlds with orbital platforms and defensive fleets, static installations that could be overwhelmed by sufficient force. Humans had taken a different approach, developing planetary shield systems that were integrated directly into the planet's infrastructure, powered by the world's own geothermal, nuclear, and solar energy systems. Earth, Mars, New Geneva, Kepler, 442b, and 17 other major human colonies were now effectively surrounded by impenetrable energy barriers that could absorb the combined firepower of entire battle fleets. The shields were one of those disruptive technologies that had so concerned the Galactic Council because they made traditional siege warfare obsolete. Of course, the shields were only the first layer of defense. Captain, called his science officer, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, from her station near the rear of the bridge. I'm reading massive quantum distortions throughout the Tau Ceti system. It looks like the Gateway Network is coming online. The Gateway Network. Marcus had to admire the audacity of the engineers who had conceived that particular project. For 60 years, human survey teams had been conducting what they called deep space archaeological expeditions, investigating dead systems and abandoned ruins throughout the galaxy. Officially, they were studying ancient civilizations and expanding humanity's understanding of galactic history. Unofficially, they had been building the largest transportation network in galactic history. The ancient ruins that dotted the galaxy weren't just historical curiosities. Many of them contained quantum resonance points, naturally occurring phenomena that could be artificially enhanced to create instantaneous travel corridors across vast distances. The technology to manipulate these points was beyond most galactic civilizations, but humanity had made breakthrough after breakthrough in quantum mechanics over the past century. What the Galactic Council didn't know was that there were now over 200 active quantum gateways hidden throughout the galaxy, each one carefully disguised within existing ruins or natural quantum distortions. The network would allow human forces to appear anywhere in the galaxy within minutes, bypassing the traditional limitations of faster-than-light travel that governed conventional military strategy. Gateway Network shows full connectivity, Dr. Tanaka reported. All nodes are stable and ready for transport operations. Thank you, Doctor. Marcus turned to address his communications officer. Lieutenant Zhang, signal all fleet commanders. Phase 1 is authorized to begin immediately. As the orders went out across the human fleet, Marcus allowed himself a moment to consider the magnitude of what humanity was about to attempt. They were facing the combined military might of 46 galactic civilizations, species that had been perfecting the art of warfare for millennia. The numerical disadvantage was staggering. The technological disadvantage, according to conventional wisdom, should have been insurmountable. But conventional wisdom had never been humanity's strong suit. The first reports began coming in within hours. Human raiders had struck simultaneously at 73 different targets throughout galactic space, appearing without warning through quantum gateways that hadn't existed moments before. They weren't attacking military installations or attempting to hold territory. Instead, they were hitting infrastructure targets with surgical precision, crippling communication networks, supply depots, and transportation hubs before vanishing back through their gateways. Admiral, Lieutenant Zhang called out, monitoring the flood of communications traffic from across the galaxy. I'm getting reports of successful strikes in the Sarthian home system, the Zephyrian trade nexus, and the Kytherian mining operations in the Outer Rim. All teams report mission success with minimal casualties. Marcus nodded. Phase 1 wasn't about causing maximum damage. It was about sending a message. Humanity could strike anywhere in the galaxy, at any time, without warning. The illusion of safety that the established powers had enjoyed for 3 millennia had just been shattered in a single coordinated assault. But Phase 1 was also about gathering intelligence. Each raid had included specialized reconnaissance teams whose primary mission was to plant quantum sensors throughout enemy territory. Within days, humanity would have real-time intelligence on every major military installation, fleet movement, and strategic resource in galactic space. Captain Rodriguez, his tactical officer, called out from her station. I'm detecting massive fleet movements throughout the galaxy. It looks like the Council is beginning to mobilize their forces. Expected response time. Based on current movement patterns, the first major battle groups should reach the outer edges of human space within 72 hours. The main force won't be fully assembled for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Marcus smiled grimly. In 2 weeks, the galaxy was going to discover that humanity had been very busy during their centuries of peaceful development. The reports from the Prometheus's sister ships painted a picture of controlled chaos throughout galactic space. The established powers were reacting exactly as human strategists had predicted, mobilizing massive fleets and preparing for a conventional war of conquest. They were thinking in terms of territorial objectives and siege warfare, planning to systematically occupy human colonies until humanity was forced to surrender. What they didn't understand was that humanity had been preparing for asymmetrical warfare from the very beginning. They had studied the galaxy's military history and learned that every successful galactic war had followed the same basic pattern. massive fleets engaging in set-piece battles, with victory going to whoever could bring the most firepower to bear at crucial points. Humanity had no intention of fighting that kind of war. Signal from the Stealth Reconnaissance Fleet, Lieutenant Zhang reported. Operation Looking Glass is proceeding on schedule. Deep penetration teams have successfully infiltrated 15 major fleet concentrations. Operation Looking Glass was perhaps the most audacious part of humanity's war plan. Rather than waiting for enemy fleets to reach human space, specially equipped stealth ships had used the quantum gateway network to position themselves within enemy formations before hostilities had even begun. They were invisible, undetectable by any known sensor technology, and armed with weapons systems that existed nowhere in the galactic military databases. When the time came, those hidden ships would reveal themselves in the most devastating way possible. And the industrial conversion? Marcus asked. Proceeding faster than projected, replied Commander Okafor from the engineering station. All civilian manufacturing facilities have successfully switched to military production. Current estimate is that we'll be producing war materials at a rate 5 times our peacetime capacity within 48 hours. That was another advantage of human adaptability. While other species maintained separate civilian and military production systems, humanity had designed their entire industrial infrastructure with dual-use capability. Every factory that produced civilian goods could be quickly reconfigured to produce military equipment. Every commercial shipyard could start building warships instead of cargo vessels. Every research facility could shift from peaceful applications to military technology. The galaxy's intelligence services had dramatically underestimated human military capacity because they had been measuring only dedicated military production. They had no idea that humanity's entire civilization could transform itself into a war machine within hours of the decision being made. Captain, Dr. Tanaka called out from her station. I'm detecting some unusual quantum signatures in the outer system. It looks like our visitors are arriving. Marcus checked his tactical display and felt his pulse quicken. 3 massive objects had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. The energy signatures matched Sarthian Empire battlecruisers, among the most powerful warships in the galaxy. It looked like the enemy had decided to probe human defenses before committing their main force. Time to intercept? He asked. At current speed, they'll reach the inner system in approximately 6 hours, his navigator reported. Should I signal the defense fleet to move to intercept? Marcus considered his options. The approaching Sarthian ships represented a significant military force, each one capable of reducing a planet to slag. Under normal circumstances, humanity would need to commit a substantial portion of their visible fleet to deal with them. But these were not normal circumstances. Negative, Marcus said calmly. Signal the defense grid to remain in position. We'll let our new toys handle this one. Dr. Tanaka looked up from her instruments with barely concealed excitement. Captain, are you authorizing the use of Project Prometheus? I am. Project Prometheus had been one of humanity's most carefully guarded secrets. For 30 years, human scientists had been working on theoretical applications of controlled quantum manipulation, research that had led to breakthroughs in everything from faster-than-light communication to planetary defense systems. But the most significant breakthrough had been the development of what humans called reality anchors. The technology was based on a simple observation. All faster-than-light travel in the galaxy depended on manipulating the fundamental structure of space-time itself. Ships created temporary distortions that allowed them to travel between points almost instantaneously. But what would happen if those distortions could be prevented from forming? Reality anchors online, Dr. Tanaka reported, targeting the incoming vessels. On the tactical display, Marcus watched as the 3 Sarthian battlecruisers suddenly stopped dead in space. Their faster-than-light drives had simply stopped working, as if the universe itself had forgotten how to bend. The ships found themselves stranded in normal space, millions of kilometers from their intended target, with no way to complete their journey except at conventional speeds. It would take them months to reach the inner system using normal propulsion. By that time, the war would be over. Signal from the lead Sarthian vessel, Lieutenant Zhang reported. They're demanding an explanation for what they call impossible technological interference. Open a channel, Marcus ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Sarthian battlecruiser. The alien captain, his chitinous hide marked with the scars of countless battles, glared out at Marcus with obvious confusion and barely contained rage. Human vessel. The Sarthian commander spoke in heavily accented Standard Galactic. You will explain how you have interfered with our navigation systems. No known technology can prevent faster-than-light travel. Marcus smiled politely. Commander, I'm afraid there's been a slight misunderstanding. You're not experiencing technological interference. You're experiencing a localized reality distortion field that prevents certain types of space-time manipulation. It's a safety feature we've installed throughout human space to prevent accidents. The Sarthian commander's expression darkened. Impossible. Such technology does not exist. With respect, Commander, it does now. I should probably mention that the field extends throughout this entire system and several neighboring star systems. You're welcome to attempt to leave, but I'm afraid you'll find your faster-than-light capabilities non-functional until you reach the field boundary. The implications hit the Sarthian commander like a physical blow. His ships were trapped in human space, unable to retreat or call for reinforcement, completely at the mercy of whatever defensive systems humanity chose to employ. This is an act of war, the commander snarled. Actually, Marcus replied pleasantly. Your council declared war on us 72 hours ago. We're simply responding to your invasion of our territory. However, I'm authorized to offer you safe passage out of human space if you agree to withdraw immediately and report back to your superiors that human space is now effectively sealed off from outside interference. The tactical implications were staggering. If humanity could prevent faster-than-light travel throughout their territory, then traditional military doctrine became completely useless. Massive fleets would be unable to coordinate movements, unable to retreat quickly, unable to bring their superior numbers to bear effectively. The entire basis of galactic warfare had just been turned upside down. You're bluffing, the Sarthian commander said, but Marcus could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Am I? Commander, your ships have been equipped with standard galactic sensors for centuries. I invite you to scan the surrounding space and tell me what you find. There was a long pause as the Sarthian commander consulted with his technical staff. When he looked up again, his expression had changed from anger to something approaching fear. There are quantum distortions throughout this entire region of space, he said slowly. The readings suggest massive alterations to the fundamental structure of reality itself. How is this possible? Marcus shrugged. Humans have always been good at solving problems, Commander. The problem of defending ourselves against overwhelming odds required some creative solutions. The Reality Anchor Network is just one of them. The Sarthian commander was quiet for several long moments, clearly struggling to process the implications of what he was seeing. Human, he said finally, what have you done? We've prepared for war, Commander. The kind of war that no one in the galaxy has ever seen before. Your superiors wanted to force humanity to conform to galactic standards. I'm afraid they've just discovered that human standards are quite different from anything they imagined. Marcus gestured to his communications officer, who cut the transmission. The three Sarthian battlecruisers hung motionless in space, their crews undoubtedly struggling to understand how their supposedly inferior opponents had just rendered the most powerful warships in the galaxy completely helpless. Captain, Lieutenant Zhang reported, I'm receiving urgent communications from across the galaxy. It appears that reality anchor networks have been activated in over 40 different systems. Enemy fleets throughout galactic space are finding themselves stranded and unable to maneuver. Marcus nodded. The quantum gateway network that had taken decades to construct had been built with multiple purposes in mind. Transportation was just one function. The gateways also served as anchor points for reality distortion fields that could encompass entire star systems, creating zones where faster-than-light travel was simply impossible. In a single coordinated action, humanity had effectively cut the galaxy's military forces off from each other, preventing coordination and reducing the effectiveness of superior numbers. It was the kind of strategic masterstroke that could only have been planned by a species that thought about warfare in fundamentally different ways. Signal all ships, Marcus ordered. Phase 2 is authorized to begin immediately. As the orders went out across the human fleet, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The galaxy had declared war on humanity because they feared human innovation and adaptability. They were about to discover that their fears had been entirely justified, but far too late to do anything about it. The real war was about to begin, and it would be fought on humanity's terms. General Elena Vasquez stood in the command center of the Orbital Defense Station above New Geneva, watching as her tactical display painted a picture that would have been impossible to imagine just days earlier. Across the galaxy, the combined fleets of 46 civilizations found themselves scattered, divided, and increasingly desperate as they struggled to adapt to a form of warfare that existed nowhere in their military doctrines. "Status report on the enemy fleets?" she asked her intelligence officer. Major Kim Park consulted his holographic displays, pulling data from quantum sensors hidden throughout galactic space. "Widespread confusion and increasing panic, General. The Zephyrian biofleets are attempting to adapt their living ships to overcome the reality distortions, but their organisms are having severe biological reactions to the quantum interference. The Sarthian Empire has recalled all available forces to their core systems, but they're having to use conventional propulsion, which means their main battle groups won't be able to coordinate for weeks." Elena nodded grimly. The Reality Anchor Network had exceeded even optimistic projections for effectiveness. By preventing faster-than-light travel throughout key regions of space, humanity had essentially broken the galaxy's military machine. Modern galactic warfare depended entirely on the ability to move massive fleets quickly between star systems. Without that capability, even the most powerful civilizations found themselves reduced to fighting with whatever forces happened to be in the right place at the wrong time. "And the Kytherian response?" Elena asked. "Interesting development there, General," Major Park replied. "They've stopped trying to break through the reality fields and have instead begun retrofitting their mining equipment for military use. Intelligence suggests they're planning to use their industrial ships as improvised weapons platforms." Elena raised an eyebrow. The Kytherians were known throughout the galaxy for their massive mining operations, using ships the size of small moons to extract resources from entire asteroid belts. The idea of turning those industrial giants into weapons was both innovative and terrifying. "Threat assessment? Low to moderate," Park responded. "Their industrial ships are incredibly durable and carry enormous energy extraction systems that could be weaponized. However, they're also slow, unwieldy, and designed for precision work rather than combat. Our stealth raiders should be able to handle them without difficulty." "Speaking of our raiders," Elena said, "what's the current status of Phase 2 operations?" Major Park's expression brightened slightly. "Exceeding all expectations, General. Our deep strike teams have successfully disabled communication networks in 37 different systems. The Council's ability to coordinate their response has been reduced by approximately 80%. Most of their member species are now operating on outdated intelligence and local command authority only." Phase 2 had been designed to systematically dismantle the galaxy's command and control infrastructure. While Phase 1 had focused on demonstrating humanity's ability to strike anywhere, Phase 2 was about ensuring that the enemy couldn't effectively respond to those strikes. Human infiltration teams, using quantum gateways to appear deep behind enemy lines, had been targeting communication relays, command centers, and intelligence gathering stations throughout galactic space. The strategy was based on a fundamental understanding of how galactic civilizations operated. After 3,000 years of peace, they had developed centralized command structures that depended on instantaneous communication across vast distances. By severing those communication links, humanity had effectively reduced 46 advanced civilizations to 46 isolated groups of confused and increasingly frightened military units. "General," called out her strategic planning officer, Colonel Martinez, "we're receiving reports from the frontline reconnaissance units. It appears the enemy is beginning to adapt their tactics." Elena turned to face the colonel's station. "Explain." "Several species are reverting to pre-faster-than-light communication methods. The Heliconites are using quantum-entangled message drones. The Altarians have activated what appears to be an ancient network of psychic communication nodes. Most significantly, the Andromedans have begun deploying their archive ships." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Archive ships were legendary among the galaxy's older civilizations, massive vessels that contained the complete technological and cultural knowledge of entire species. They were typically deployed only in the most desperate circumstances, when a civilization faced the possibility of complete extinction. How many archive ships are we tracking? 17 confirmed, with possibly more launching from systems where our sensors have limited coverage, Colonel Martinez replied. Intelligence estimates suggest that at least 12 different species have activated their extinction protocols. The implications were sobering. Humanity had succeeded in disrupting galactic military coordination to such an extent that multiple species now believe they were facing an existential threat. The archive ships were essentially backup copies of entire civilizations, sent to distant regions of space where they could rebuild if their homeworlds were destroyed. General, Major Park interrupted. I'm receiving priority communications from the Altarian delegation. They're requesting immediate negotiation under the emergency peace protocols. Elena considered this development carefully. The Altarians had been the only species to vote against the war declaration, and their psychic abilities made them uniquely suited to serve as intermediaries in galactic conflicts. If they were invoking the emergency peace protocols, it meant they believed the situation was spiraling toward complete galactic catastrophe. Open a channel, Elena ordered. The main display flickered to life, showing the ethereal form of Ambassador Thylan, the Altarian representative to the Galactic Council. The alien's translucent features were marked with what appeared to be profound exhaustion and fear. General Vasquez. Thylan spoke directly into her mind through the psychic communication link. I am contacting you under the authority of the emergency peace protocols established after the Great Purge Wars. The current conflict threatens to escalate beyond all acceptable parameters. Elena responded aloud, knowing that her words would be translated into psychic impressions that the Altarian could understand. Ambassador Thylan, humanity appreciates your concern, but I should point out that we did not initiate this conflict. The Galactic Council declared war on us. Indeed, Thylan replied, and that declaration may have been the most catastrophic mistake in galactic history. General, you must understand that the council members who voted for war did so because they believed humanity could be quickly overwhelmed and forced to accept council authority. They viewed this as a police action, not a true war. Their miscalculation is not our responsibility, Elena said firmly. Perhaps not, Thylan acknowledged, but the consequences of their miscalculation threaten every living being in the galaxy. General, in the past 72 hours, humanity has demonstrated military capabilities that exist nowhere in our databases. Your reality anchor technology alone represents a paradigm shift that renders 3 millennia of military doctrine obsolete. Combined with your quantum gateway network and stealth capabilities, you have effectively achieved military supremacy over the entire galaxy. Elena remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the assessment. The problem, Thylan continued, is that many council species cannot accept this reality. Rather than seeking peace, they are escalating their response. The Sarthian Empire has authorized the use of stellar disruption weapons. The Heliconite Consortium is preparing to deploy planet killers throughout human space. And the Andromedans. Thylan paused, his psychic emanations showing what could only be described as terror. The Andromedans have activated the Doomsday Protocol. Elena felt her blood turn cold. The Doomsday Protocol was a theoretical concept that existed in the deepest classified files of human intelligence services. It was based on reports from the Great Purge Wars, descriptions of weapons so devastating that their use could sterilize entire star systems. Most human analysts had assumed the reports were exaggerated, the product of primitive sensors and traumatized witnesses. Ambassador, Elena said carefully, are you telling me that the Andromedans possess planet-killing weapons? Worse, Thylan replied. They possess star-killing weapons. The Andromedans were the primary architects of the Great Purge Wars 3,000 years ago. They developed weapons capable of inducing stellar collapse, creating artificial supernovas that could destroy everything within dozens of light years. The Galactic Peace Accords included specific provisions requiring the dismantling of those weapons, but Thylan's psychic emanations conveyed bitter regret. Recent intelligence suggests that the Andromedans never actually destroyed their doomsday arsenals. They simply hid them. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. Elena had been prepared for conventional warfare, even on a galactic scale. She had not been prepared for the possibility that desperate enemies might choose to destroy entire star systems rather than accept defeat. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Unknown," Dylan replied. "Stellar disruption weapons require extensive preparation and precise positioning. However, if the Andromedans began their preparations when war was declared, they could potentially deploy these weapons within days." Elena turned to her communications officer. "Signal Fleet Command immediately. Priority Alpha Protocols. We need to contact Admiral Chun." As the urgent messages went out across the quantum communication network, Elena found herself facing a strategic problem that no human commander had ever confronted. Humanity had succeeded brilliantly in the early stages of the war, using superior technology and innovative tactics to neutralize the galaxy's conventional military advantage. But success had apparently driven some of their enemies to consider options that went far beyond conventional warfare. "General," Colonel Martinez called out from his station, "we're detecting massive energy buildups in 17 different star systems. The quantum signatures match theoretical models for stellar manipulation technology." Elena stared at the tactical display in horror. 17 stars. If the Andromedans succeeded in triggering artificial supernovas, they could potentially sterilize hundreds of inhabited worlds, including several human colonies. The death toll would be beyond calculation. "Time to completion?" she asked. "Based on the energy accumulation rates, approximately 60 hours for the nearest system, up to 120 hours for the most distant." 60 hours. Elena felt the weight of billions of lives settling on her shoulders. Humanity had approximately 2.5 days to either find a way to stop the stellar disruption weapons or prepare for a level of retaliation that would make their current military advantages irrelevant. "General," Major Park announced urgently, "I'm receiving a direct communication from Admiral Chun. She's requesting immediate strategic consultation with all senior commanders." The main display switched to show Admiral Chen's command center aboard the UES Prometheus. The Admiral looked tired but determined, surrounded by tactical displays that painted a picture of conflict throughout the galaxy. "General Vasquez," Admiral Chen said without preamble, "I assume you've been briefed on the stellar disruption threat." "Just received the intelligence from the Altarian delegation," Elena confirmed. "What's our response?" Admiral Chen's expression was grim. "We're implementing Protocol Omega. All human forces are being recalled to defensive positions around our core worlds. We're abandoning the offensive operations and preparing for siege warfare." Elena felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. Protocol Omega was humanity's last resort defensive plan, designed for scenarios where retreat was impossible and defeat would mean extinction. It involved withdrawing all human forces to heavily fortified positions and preparing to fight until the last ship was destroyed. "Admiral," Elena said carefully, "if we retreat now, we're essentially conceding that the enemy can escalate beyond our ability to respond. That sets a precedent that could haunt us for centuries. The alternative," Admiral Chun replied, "is allowing them to trigger artificial supernovas that could kill billions of people. I'm not willing to call that bluff, General." Elena stared at the tactical displays surrounding her, thinking furiously. Humanity had achieved the impossible by preparing for this war with technologies and strategies that existed nowhere in galactic databases. They had outmaneuvered, outfought, and outthought enemies with thousands of years more experience. But all of that could become irrelevant if desperate opponents were willing to commit genocide on a scale that boggled the mind. "Admiral," Elena said slowly, "what if there was a way to neutralize the stellar disruption weapons without retreating?" Admiral Chen leaned forward. "Explain." "The same quantum manipulation technology that powers our reality anchors and gateway network," Elena said, her mind racing through possibilities. "If we can prevent faster-than-light travel by manipulating space-time distortions, what else might we be able to manipulate?" Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment, clearly following Elena's line of reasoning. "You're suggesting we might be able to interfere with stellar manipulation technology?" I'm suggesting that humanity has always been good at turning defensive technologies into offensive ones, Elena replied. We built reality anchors to protect ourselves from enemy fleets. But the same technology that can stabilize space-time distortions might also be able to destabilize them in very specific ways. The implications hung in the air between them. If humanity could adapt their quantum manipulation technology to interfere with stellar disruption weapons, they might be able to turn those weapons against their creators. It would be the ultimate demonstration of human adaptability, turning the enemy's most devastating weapons into tools of their own defeat. General, Admiral Chun said finally, you're talking about technologies that don't exist yet. Admiral, Elena replied. 3 days ago, reality anchors didn't exist either. Neither did the quantum gateway network or the stealth systems that have been terrorizing enemy fleets throughout the galaxy. Humanity has been achieving the impossible for 2.5 centuries. Why should we stop now? Admiral Chun smiled for the first time since the conversation began. How long would you need? Elena turned to her science staff, who had been following the conversation with growing excitement. Dr. Patel? Dr. Rajesh Patel, the station's chief theoretical physicist, looked up from his calculations with the expression of a man who had just glimpsed the fundamental structure of the universe. General, the basic theory is sound. We already have the quantum manipulation infrastructure in place. Adapting it for stellar interference would require some significant modifications, but he paused, double-checking his figures. Give me 36 hours and a team of our best quantum engineers. Elena looked back at Admiral Chun. 36 hours, Admiral. We can have a working prototype in 36 hours. And if it doesn't work? Admiral Chun asked. Then, we implement Protocol Omega and make them pay for every world they sterilize, Elena replied grimly. Admiral Chun nodded slowly. Do it, General. Give me a weapon that can stop stars from dying. As the transmission ended and Elena's team began working frantically to adapt humanity's most advanced technology for a purpose no one had ever imagined, she couldn't help but think about the terrible irony of the situation. The Galactic Council had declared war on humanity because they feared human innovation and adaptability. Now that innovation might be the only thing standing between civilization and the complete destruction of inhabited worlds throughout the galaxy, the next 36 hours would determine whether humanity's reputation for solving impossible problems would extend to preventing artificial supernovas. If they succeeded, the war would end with humanity's victory being so complete that no one would ever again question their right to exist as an independent species. If they failed, the war would end with entire star systems being reduced to expanding clouds of radioactive debris. Elena turned to her science team, who were already deep in calculations that would have been impossible just hours earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, we have 36 hours to save the galaxy. I suggest we get to work.